In my earlier video on banking credit appraisal 109, I discussed current assets. I made a mention that in order to classify an asset as a current asset while undertaking credit appraisal, two conditions need to be satisfied. One, the asset should be a part of the operating cycle. Number two, the asset should be convertible into cash in one operating cycle not exceeding 12 months. Today, by this video, let us discuss what is operating cycle in credit appraisal, how operating cycle differs in business concerns engaged in service, trading, and manufacturing. What is its relevance in working capital assessment? In simple terms, if you look at the operating cycle of a manufacturing concern, the business has cash, it purchases raw materials, converts that into semi-finished goods. In further processing, it becomes finished goods and it sells the product either against cash or on credit terms. If it sells it on credit terms, it is known as trade debtors. Only when the buyer makes payment, it gets converted into cash. Any business entity can be classified into service industry or a trading concern or a manufacturing concern. In service industry, one of the examples could be a doctor who provides consultancy to his or her patients. A trading firm is the one which purchases the finished goods and sells it. An example could be a retail medical store. In case of a service industry, generally there are no inventory. The person who provides the service is only giving services. Whereas in case of a trading concern, there are finished goods as inventory. He or she purchases the finished goods and sells it in the market. An example could be a retail medical store. When it comes to a manufacturing activity, the entity procures the raw materials, uses a machinery or equipment, converts that into finished goods. Here in this example, the raw materials are iron ore and limestone, which are put inside the electric arc furnace and it gets converted into a molten metal. On further processing, it gets converted into TMT bars. Here, the iron ore and limestone are known as raw materials, and the molten metal is a semi-finished goods, and the TMT bars are finished goods. Semi-finished goods is nothing but a stage where the material has moved away from the raw material stage but has not reached the finished goods stage. How much funds should be invested in working capital is decided by the operating cycle of the firm. I have already mentioned working capital is the fund required to manage the day-to-day activities. Now, bank gives working capital finance against the estimated investment in current assets. The operating cycle consists of a sequence of current asset conversions. The main operating current assets for most business are inventory and trade receivables. However, this is not applicable for a service industry where there are no inventory at all. But there could be a trade receivable. The service provider has provided the service. The payment may be received immediately as cash or after some time. If it is received after some time, or the service provider gives some time to make payment, it appears as a trade receivable. Let us look at the operating cycles of a service provider, a trader, and a manufacturer. Operating cycle of a service provider. He has got cash. It gets converted as debtors in case the person who receives the service doesn't make immediately. So there can be two stages. One is cash to cash, that is immediately on providing the service, the payment is received. The second is the credit, trade receivable and cash. After having providing the service, it becomes a trade receivable and gets converted into cash after some time. There are no inventory in case of a service provider. Upon completion of service, either the service provider receives cash or the amount to be received for the service provider becomes a trade receivable. When the receiver of the service makes payment, the account receivable becomes cash. However, the service provider incurs expenses while rendering service. Operating cycle of a trading firm. He has got cash. He purchases the finished goods, undertakes the sales. If the buyer makes payment immediately, it straight away becomes cash. Or if the buyer makes payment after some time, it remains as a trade debtors or as accounts receivable. The operating cycle of a trading firm starts with the purchase of finished goods. Cash or loans are used to purchase the transaction. When finished goods are sold, sales happen either on cash terms or on credit terms. If the finished goods are sold on cash terms, the cycle ends with the receipt of cash. If the finished goods are sold on credit terms, the sales become account receivable or trade debtors. When buyers settle the dues, the account receivable becomes cash and the cycle ends. Operating cycle of a manufacturing firm. The operating cycle starts with the cash. Cash is used in the purchase of raw materials and continues through the production, wherein raw materials get converted into semi-finished goods and finished goods, followed by sale of products. The cycle ends when sales are converted into cash. The sales become cash when the cash sales are made. If the sales are on credit terms, when sales are converted through collection of trade receivables. Cash or credit is required to start the cycle, and cash is the ending point of the cycle. This is explained with the help of figures. From the supplier, the raw materials are paid, cash is paid for that. The raw material gets converted into semi-finished goods or work in progress as it is called. The work in progress requires wages, power and factory overheads like employment of labor, utilization of power and other factory overheads. This work in progress gets converted into finished goods. If the finished goods are sold on cash, the cash is received and the cycle ends. If the credit is provided to the buyers, finished goods become trade receivable and then trade receivables gets cash. This is the operating cycle of a manufacturing concern. The raw materials become a stock in progress or semi-finished goods or work in progress, utilizing wages, power, fuel, and manufacturing expenses. Machinery assists this conversion. Similarly, a stock in process, when it becomes finished goods, machinery assists the conversion where wages, power, fuel, and other manufacturing expenses are incurred. The raw materials themselves shall not get converted into semi-finished goods and finished goods, but may do so in conjunction with other fixed assets. The conversion needs the service of labor and also has to incur expenses like power, fuel, etc. The operating cycle is a short-term cycle which is associated with the day-to-day activities in a business. Each industry has a typical operating cycle which business aim to manage as efficiently as possible. The time the business requires to complete the operating cycle depends on various factors such as source of raw material, distance of suppliers from the location of the business, number of sources, bargaining powers of the suppliers. 2. Purchase terms, credit period available on purchases, processing time, time required to convert raw materials into finished goods. 4. Number of products the business has. Selling terms, credit period extended on sale, competition, bargaining powers of buyers, etc. Operating cycle of a trader is shorter than that of a manufacturing firm. The operating cycle varies depending upon the nature of industry. The operating cycle of a shipbreaking unit is longer than a PVC manufacturing unit. Thank you all. I shall come out with such small videos on learning topics. Subscribe to my channel and click the like button which enables you to get notifications whenever a video of mine is uploaded. Follow me on Facebook.